Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of No One's a Critic. I'm Kino, joined as always by Mac. How you doing this week, Mac?
Not bad. Just got back from the cinema. We saw Furiosa.
Oh, okay.
Very good. I
So it was
enjoyed it.
like you and like three other people.
Wait, what? Yeah, well, apparently that's
Because
a
yeah, it's not doing well.
yeah, that's a shame. Um, which is weird because it's not. A lot of people are trying to like make sense of it. Where it's like the first one did extremely well. It's got a lot of hype. George Miller came back to direct it. It's got Chris Hemsworth, Anya Taylor-Joy. Um, and it was funny because I actually like looked up the highest grossing movies from last year. The highest grossing movie this year, well, the highest grossing was Dune 2, followed by Godzilla and Kong, and then the new Planet of the Apes so far. I think it's up to 300 million. But what's interesting is that, so the third highest grossing film this year, which is the Planet of the Apes film, wouldn't even crack the top 20 of last year, which is interesting. I don't know. Granted, we're only about halfway through the year, but still, that seems a little
Less
strange.
people are going to the movies in general.
Yeah, it seems strange where it's like it seems to be like our moviegoers, is it just slowing down in general? Like what's going on? I don't know. I don't really know what the deal is.
Yeah, I I saw you on Twitter were arguing with someone basically being like the majority of people don't care whether the main character like Mad Max is in it or not. And I actually disagreed. I think like a lot of people are not going to go watch that movie just because um Mad Max isn't in it. Not saying I agree with that, like that interpretation, like that's why like I don't think people should not watch the film because of that, but I think you were underestimating how many people that's probably a factor for. Like, I know a lot of people who are not going to watch the new Witcher season without Henry Cavill, just because it's not that actor anymore. People get really attached to like specific characters or specific actors, and when people don't when they don't feature those stuff anymore, they're like, why would I continue to watch it? And so I think that's probably going to hurt the film too.
Yeah, but the issue with that is like, so for the Witcher example, that's an example of like so like the actor was in it. Well, the other issue there is like the series was kind of dying anyway. Like the first season was kind of well received, but then there was like a lot of drama with Henry and the writers, and it seemed like a shit show. Because like, are they on season 4 now? This is the one that Liam's coming into.
Yeah, I think I don't. I mean, I haven't watched it forever, but
Oh
I
yeah,
think
and
that's
there was like no press for seasons 2 or 3. It kind of like died a slow death. The fact that they're even continuing it, I'm not even sure why. Maybe again, maybe I'm out of touch in terms of numbers of like people who view it. But it seems like when they said, "Oh, Liam's coming for season 4," I was like, "Season fucking what?" Like that the show's 4 seasons in. The difference there is that I think, and it's kind of frustrating because it seemed like a lot of people were trying to rewrite the narrative on it. So the difference there is that, one, the Mad Max saga was like when Fury Road came out, a lot of people who love Fury Road, a lot of those people who made Fury Road a hit and the reason it was so successful, it wasn't as if it was like diehard Mad Max loyalists. Like the Mad Max saga was sort of like, it's sort of a strange one, like where people kind of know it, but it's not like this huge. It's not like Die Hard or like, in some cases, um, for like in terms of like some fans, but like it when Fury Road came out, it didn't seem like the reception to it and the praise for it was, hey, finally all of us like Mad Max fans are coming out of the woodwork. It seemed like it was just because it was such an incredibly strong, original, incredibly well done action movie, particularly for its like the practical action, all that. That seemed to be the big selling point, even to this day. Fury Road is still heralded. Mad Max 2, I think, is sort of talked about, but whereas the first and Thunderdome kind of are, kind of aren't, not really. So I don't really know if I buy this idea that, well, because Max isn't in it, that's sort of like the selling point, particularly because like it wasn't even Mel Gibson returning. Like if it was like Mel Gibson, like if Fury Road was like Mel Gibson, returning to like his iconic role, I think that would be one thing. But like thinking back, like if you were a fan of Fury Road, the idea that you wouldn't see Furiosa because Max isn't a peer seems very, that doesn't seem to track for me. Again, I think it might be the case for like a number of like losers who hate women, like protagonists in general. Um, but that does not seem to be.
I don't even think it's that, man. I think that I think you're overestimating most like movie going audiences. I think it's probably like, I'm not saying it's the only factor. I think again, movies in general are tracking down. Like people, one, can't afford to go see a lot of them because movies are very expensive nowadays. Like if you want popcorn and snacks and everything, you're going to spend a significant chunk of money. And a lot of people just don't want to deal with that. But I think a lot of people, it's like, it's not that they're like diehard Mad Max fans. It's just that like, again, they're like, why would I even go see this? A perfect example was uh the Hunger Games series. Like they did a prequel one about the villain Snow. And
Mhm.
my wife was actually like this. She really liked the Hunger Games, but she was like, why would I watch that film? It's like, I don't like President Snow. Why would I watch a movie about him? And to you and to me, I would be like, well, it's part of the same series. Like it's by the same writer. You would imagine it's like a story worth telling. And I actually pushed her to read it. She's actually reading the book now. I think she likes it for the most part, but I think for a lot of people, it's just like it doesn't have the character in it. Why would I go watch it? Like I don't think people think about it that deeply. I think for a lot of people, it's a very simplistic, like it doesn't have that main character I like or the actor that I liked from the first one. It doesn't even have like it's not the original uh Furiosa from the movie, right? Like it's a different actress.
Anya Taylor-Joy playing the character, right? Yeah, because it's a prequel story. So
So I think for a lot of people they'd be like, well, it doesn't even have the actress that I like. Why would I go watch it? I think a lot of people are very simplistic with their choices like that.
maybe I just overestimate like the intelligence of the movie. Like I was chatting with a guy, and I was like, so I put forth the argument of like, it seems the idea that you would be a fan of Fury Road, and who Fury, have you seen Fury Road?
I saw it way back in the day. I'm not the biggest like fan. Like I don't remember a lot of it. So it's I
Mhm.
saw it, but it didn't have a huge impact on me.
So like the argument I made was like the idea that you would, because like I would imagine if you were someone who was like very um like a Mad Max loyalist, which I don't know how many like people there actually are. Um, it kind of, what I mean is like, I seem like Fury Road was kind of almost like a reset for the fandom in a way, where it was like it kind of took a franchise that hadn't really been talked about for, I think Thunderdome came out in like what, 85, and Thunderdome was kind of, yeah, it was kind of lame. Um, and kind of revitalized it in the sense where it was like it introduced a lot of new people to the, like I almost wonder how many people who were like fuck yeah Fury Road, how many people actually had seen the original trilogy. They would have been like, oh yeah, the Mad Max films. um so like the argument I made was like, it's like it seems weird that like if you saw Mad Fury Road, who I would argue Max is more of a, he does have an arc in the film, but I think I put forward the argument. I think consider him, what's it called, the deuteragonist. I think is sort of, which is not the protagonist, but almost like the second, like almost not a peripheral character, a side character, but almost like the second important character in the narrative. Yeah. Whereas Furiosa is the, I would argue, like the protagonist. If you actually like look at the film, what actually happens, she seems to be the central focus, the protagonist of the story. Um, so yeah, my argument was like, well, it seems weird that if you liked that film, you wouldn't want to see this one. And the person I was speaking to was like, well, I didn't even know they were in the same. I didn't even know it was going to be a Mad Max film. And I was like, well, that seems to be more of a.
Well, that's my point exactly. I don't think most people think that deeply about it. I think most people are like, one, I don't think that movie was super advertised because a lot of people, it seemed like they didn't even know it was coming out or they didn't even know like what it was. So I think there's a lot of factors, but I think a lot of people, it's just literally like, oh, the main guy isn't in it, and this one I'm not gonna go watch it. Like they don't think that deeply about like, oh, it's part of the same franchise or the same writer, director, or whatever. It's just like, oh, it doesn't have the guy. Like Black Panther was like that. The second one, after the main guy died, obviously very reverent to the character and is like they're trying to honor the character as much as they can in that film or whatever. but I mean, it didn't perform as well as the first one did. And again, there's probably more than
Yeah,
one reason for that.
but it still made like close to like $900 million.
Yeah, but the
Well,
other
that's
one made 1.6 billion. So it's like you can clearly see a downward trend here.
a little.
That's not only I mean it's like half it made like half what the original did. And again, it's not the only factor. Again, Marvel has been trending downward in views for a long time. But I think for a lot of people it's like, "Oh, the main guy isn't in it anymore. I'm not going to go watch it." I think a lot of people are that simple.
Okay, then maybe they're just stupid. Maybe I'm just mistaken then. But the bigger issue for me was the fact that particularly with the like the films that have come out, Dune 2 is sort of like the one exception, and Godzilla and Kong. Well, it's it meant people were. It was funny that people were mentioning that like, well, the Godzilla and Kong film did well, but even sort of like by big blockbuster franchise standards, I think it made like 500 million, which is good. But when we look at like the Fast and Furious movies, like each one of those made like a billion or like close to it. Um, what was it else? The Super Mario Brothers movie made like 1.5. Um, it seems like a strange year where even Dune 2, I was kind of surprised that it had made as little as it did, considering the massive hype around it. Like considering like last year with the Oppenheimer Barbie, hype, it almost seemed like Dune 2, the hype for that film was like way more. But then again, maybe it's an issue of, I think this is an issue too, where sort of the um, quote unquote film goer, like online social film goers, they're sometimes living in sort of like, and I agree with this. You're almost like living in a different world compared to like your average moviegoer. Like for example, what was a film that like, oh, the Garfield movie came out this year and it did pretty. It didn't do super well, but it did pretty well. I had no idea that movie existed until like, I think because people were talking about the like Furiosa like got the same amount of box office as the Garfield movie, and I was like, "What the fuck is the Garfield movie?"
Yeah, it's again, I think most people are just like, "Oh, Garfield, I recognize that name. I'll go watch that film." Or, it's like I don't think people think as much about like the kind of like what they're gonna go watch or care so much about online hype as like film Twitter does. It's like it's a very different world. And again, I think that there's a lot of factors. Again, movies have been trending downward as people can't afford to go watch as many movies as they did back in the day. Also, streaming has like hurt the film industries. A lot of people are like, oh, I'll watch it, but I'll watch it when it comes out. Like a lot of times, I think Furiosa isn't going to come out in like a month or two. Like it's going to come out on streaming services. So a lot of people are like, well, why would I pay money? I'll just wait till it comes out and watch it at home.
I'm very afraid that that might be the factor, and I'm really because there was a huge controversy where because Dune 2 was doing numbers, like it was like I think me and my wife we went out to New York and we were checking to go see before we had arrived there, Dune 2 was still playing in IMAX. And we looked at showings. It was selling out like a 2 p.m. Wednesday showing. Like it was like still going strong. But even in all that, Max announced that like, hey, it's going to be streaming in like 2 weeks, which was like, I think like a month or two, maybe like a month and a half into its run. Um, which was insane. Everyone was like, "What are you doing? The film is still going strong. Why are you?" Because even if it's like something that people will go out to the theater to see or want to see it in theater, if you tell them, if you announce, "Hey, it'll be on streaming in like a week," that's going to deter many people. And I'm almost worried that it's gotten to the point where people are almost expecting. I don't think that if they have announced when Furiosa is coming on the streaming, but I think there almost is like an expectation, like, I'll probably be on like in a month or two, as opposed to how it used to be, which was like 6 months, if not a year.
The streaming option killed the Many Saints, I think. Like I don't think that movie would have killed in general, especially when the reviews started coming in. But like the fact that it premiered simultaneously and it was on the ass end of COVID, it killed that film in box office numbers, and which is a shame because, like I said, that's a deeply flawed film. But I was like, it hurt that David Chase kind of got such low box office figures. It kind of killed any chance of him um, basically getting another shot at him. Well, I guess I take that back because he is supposedly making a horror film with Terrence Winter, but um, yeah, I'm sure that hurt his career a little bit.
Yeah. And it's also weird because it's like what kind of bugs me too is like, and this kind of can tie into what we were going to talk about, but I know that the new Planet of the Apes film, it's not a reboot, but basically it takes place very far after the original trilogy. So Rise, Dawn, and War is the original trilogy. We just watched Dawn today. Excellent films. And I heard War is even better, so I'm very excited for that. Whereas Kingdom takes place like, spoilers for anyone watching. Well, actually, it's not really a spoiler. It's in the synopsis. It takes place like I think over 100 years after War. So it takes place in the same universe, but we're picking up with new characters way down the line. And what kind of like, it's weird because on one hand you have people who are like, simultaneously saying, hey, we want something new, we want something, somewhat familiar, but something new, something fresh, we want new takes on new stuff. But then when it seems to come out, when we try something new, it to your point, the idea of this, it doesn't have the character from the first movie that I liked, or it's not following the story of these characters whose story I already saw from this movie. And I guess at the point where I'm like, I don't want to like, sympathize with producers, but it does get to a point where even I'm at a loss of like, I don't even know what the hell the movie going public wants
Oh no, I mean
anymore.
it's been that way forever. Like people can say as much as they want that like, oh, we're sick of these, movies, we want something original, but then no one goes to see them. And it's always been that way. And the studios know that. They have the raw numbers of like the reason they keep making reboots and sequels and franchises and stuff like this is because those are the movies people go to see. Even movies that do well, that are like original stuff, they get like awards or they get some notice or something, like a lot of these movies that have been coming out recently, they're a blip on the radar compared to, like, again, the Garfield movie, the whatever. So, and it's always been that way. And studios know where they make their money. And again, not to say that there will never be other original stuff, but it's always going to be a blip in the radar compared to the usual schlock that gets a lot of views, a lot of money. And that's just kind of how mainstream art works.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's just like I'm getting to the point where I'm almost getting jaded, where I'm like, I do not know what people want, or compared to like what they complain about not getting at the movies, and then what they end up seeing, and I'm like, oh, I can't deal with it, man.
But again, a lot of it is like, again, film Twitter people like don't represent the vast movie going audience who it's just like, you know, a married couple with kids going to watch a movie, on the weekend. It's like they're not caring what's going to win an Oscar or whatever. They're just like, oh, okay, the kids want to go see the Garfield movie or whatever. It's like that's what the majority of people are just trying to get through their day, and I think they don't think as much about this stuff. Not to say they have to. I mean, everyone there's plenty of like art forms that you and I have no kind of concept of. We have no idea what's going on in the world of poetry, right? We have no idea what's going on in the world of any of these like other art forms, like classical music. I'm sure there's a lot of great developments there, but we listen to whatever.
Yeah. Um, but it's a shame because apparently, so we watched Rise and Dawn, and we're gonna watch War. And so War is like the original reboot of the Planet of the Apes trilogy, is those first three. And now the latest one, Kingdom, is technically the fourth, but it's starting, from what I understand, they're starting like a new trilogy with these different characters. And apparently, I mean, the first one did really well, but it was kind of the same with the original, where Rise it was actually pretty good. It was pretty strong, but then Dawn and War like took it up a notch. So I'm very excited to see where this goes. Have you seen any of them? Like,
I've actually never seen any of the reboot. I watched the original Planet of the Apes, like the '70s version,
mhm.
and I watched also um uh the Tim Burton one.
Oh
But
yeah, of
I've
course.
never seen the new series, and I hear good things. People are like it seems kind of like similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, where yes, it's like a genre film, but they're really really good genre films. And people have said a lot of great stuff about the series.
Even genre film, it was strange. Like Rise, kind of. I understood why Rise didn't get as good reception because it did kind of feel like it was sort of like a first chapter. It did kind of have trouble finding its footing. But Dawn was incredibly strong. Like very, very good action set piece drama thriller. Like very, very well done. And I've heard War is even better, so I can't wait for that. Um, but one thing that I was really amazed by, and this is sort of what we were going to talk about today, was um, the CG, not only in Rise, but particularly Dawn, which was like way more advanced. Even the films only came out a few years apart, but I don't know if it was the increased budget, but Dawn had like incredible CG effects, MOCAP effects, where you could literally like see like incredibly subtle facial expressions and emotions. Um, so then that got me thinking about the idea of as CG, as MoCap begins to progress, do we think we're going to see these performances start to? Because a lot of people will, Andy Serkis as Gollum was like the really big one, um, and people praise him and people praise the character, but I feel like it's never really ranked as like a quote unquote performance. Like people don't rank, oh, that was one of the best performances of the last like 20 years, which I think it was. Even I wasn't even a big fan of the films, but I really think it was. Um, because think people sort of write off mocap or CGI, etc., as sort of it's not real acting, and I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if we're getting to a point where that might change or.
I so I this kind of brought me like to another idea, but I think that we will see more types of uh like more different categories for like recognition. Like again, there's starting to be like more of a recognition for like animation and voice acting and music, and people are paying attention more to these things, especially as other like again animation, probably because a lot of great animes have come out, and Studio Ghibli and stuff like that. People are paying more attention, whereas for a long time it wasn't respected as like a serious art form.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot as time goes on, a lot more categories again, like music and sound design will get more respect. Again, CGI and stuff, that'll get more respect as people kind of learn to differentiate the good from the bad stuff. But I think why when you brought this up, I was like, oh, this is an interesting topic because one, I think obviously, you know, mocap deserves to get praise as much as any other aspect of acting, right? Like it takes skill. It takes, it's like an art form to do it well. You can tell the good from the bad stuff. But I think that like going along with the fact that we don't appreciate some of these things as like legitimate forms of art, I do think we sometimes um over compliment or overstate like regular acting. Like I think like
That's a good point.
we have such a hard on for acting, it's like it's all we talk about when it comes to movies and stuff. And don't get me wrong, it's like an art form, it takes a lot of skill or whatever, but I think we've kind of like there's a lot more difficult stuff that goes into making a film than just acting. Like it's honestly, I think, one of the more simpler things that happens like for a film. There's a lot of other stuff that people work much harder for than the actors themselves do, but actors get all the credit for a film's success or whatever because they're the stars, they're in front of the screen.
I completely agree. There always has sort of been like, as much as I really enjoy, talking about like the Oscars or acting or performances, films, there is sort of a level of pretentiousness attached to it. It's even evident in the idea of like, oh, this actor has been around for a while. They deserve an Oscar. It's like, well, that's not really what Oscars are. I mean, like, granted, I'm not saying like the Oscars uphold the standard, but that's not what they're supposed to be about. That's not what their stated goal is to be about. Um, 9 times out of 10, sometimes it feels like a lot of these like are like lifetime achievement awards to some extent. Oh, this actor's been around for a while. They paid their dues. Here's an Oscar. As opposed to, did this person actually give the best performance of the year? Yeah. Um, yeah, and then it kind of comes back to like not even this, because like the argument some have made is like, well, even if we see the clips of Andy Serkis performing as Gollum or as Caesar in the Apes films, then the question is how much of the work is the the CGI doing? How much of it is actually like enhancing it? Which I think is a fair point. But then the question is, it's like, to your point, how much is makeup or costume or direct or editing or directing or music? How much is that sort of influencing how we feel about an actor's performance too? And in many cases, a huge pet peeve of mine, and I'm sure you will agree, a huge pet peeve of mine is when the Oscars go gaga over any sort of even slight body transformation. Hey, this actor gained 50 pounds for this role. Like, so fucking what? Like, that's that's easy to do. It seems, and just because they did that, so what does that have to do with, oh, it shows dedication? Like, okay, but like the big controversy was when the ironically the film DiCaprio ended up winning for The Revenant. There was all this PR about like, yeah, he slept out in the cold and he ate raw fish, and it's like, what does that have to do with the actual performance? Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to say that like acting is not skillful or doesn't take like work to do. It absolutely does. And again, you can tell the good from the bad. But there's just so much I feel of like behind the scenes work that goes unappreciated. And yes, there's categories for it, right, at the Oscars and stuff like that, but no one really cares about it. And I think that um there's a lot of stuff that I think it probably takes more like skill and training to do well than acting does. Like acting, like it takes skill, but like the music that a film has, right? It took a bunch of like really talented people to play those instruments. Assuming it's like an instrumental thing, maybe they made it on a computer or whatever. But even CGI, even though we look down on CGI, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that, right? Go try to make your own CGI thing. Like it's difficult to do, and it takes a lot. And we look down on it because it's like, oh, it's a cheap form of art. And I think we can look down on it from like a studio perspective, being like, oh, why are you using this instead of practical effects? But like the actual people who do that work, it's very talented work. And I'm not saying that like they should get the Oscar instead of the actor or whatever. Like, but I do think we kind of overestimate sometimes, because it's so prominent, how much acting is leading a film versus all the background stuff that's necessary for that film to work, but we just don't appreciate it because it's not really front and center. And I think again, the CGI work, the mocap work, the fucking engineering that goes into making the technology for those things, which is a completely separate process, right? Like it all affects these things, but again, all the emphasis put on one single aspect, which is the acting most of the time.
Yeah, and then funny enough, you mentioned that. What did I just see? We saw The Fall Guy. Really fun movie. That also did not do very well compared to, if we looked at the not just the budget, but also like Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt headlining. Um, it just didn't do nearly as well as projected. Really good movie, really fun movie. What was really cool about it, it was actually directed by a former stuntman. So the stunts in it were like really, really impressive, the stunt work. And then at the end of the movie, they had a bunch of clips about like all the stunts that were done throughout the movie. It was really cool. Yeah, people really take that stuff for granted. There is sort of like an elitist, like, oh, the actors are, or even sometimes like the bit players. I think something that's really underrated in films is how much extras or bit players, particularly Mad Max, the original, or not the original, sorry, Fury Road, the 2015 one. Granted, like Charlize Theron was great. Tom Hardy was great. All the main actors were great, but it was just like, the random guy in the background just like freaking out on top of another car. That's the stuff that really kind of, I think, sells the world. Um, yeah, but yeah.
And again, like acting takes a lot of skill. I'm not talking trash on them, but yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it. I think there's room to appreciate a lot more of this stuff. And again, stuff like MOCAP, Andy Serkis, like there's for a lot of acting, it's not like always this like deeply artistic thing where it's like, I had to get into the character. A lot of what makes acting great too is like just the physical, like I'm gonna put in the work right here to to move around like this. I'm gonna wear all this fucking stuff on my face or these costumes or whatever to give a great performance. And again, I think that there's room to appreciate acting on like the art form level, and there's room to appreciate acting on like the physical, like I mean all that stuff about like body transformation and stuff. I think we can appreciate that, right? I mean there's effort that goes into that. It can be really cool. um there's stuff that can be appreciated about um going method and eating stuff in the woods or whatever. Is it the end all be all? No, but it's again, my point with all this was just to not to criticize anyone or any performance, but it's just to be like, there's a lot that goes into this stuff that we don't pay as much attention to, and I think we should try to shine more of a light on a lot of this stuff.
Well, it's interesting because even you mentioned it in passing, but vocal work in terms of like vocal performances in movies, I think that is definitely something that maybe I don't know, because like I think the biggest controversy or when this really funny enough, this was like almost 2 or 3 decades now. It was Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin, and I think that was the first or one of the first big examples of should this performance, even though it's only a vocal performance, be nominated for an Oscar or be at least in consideration? And obviously, like a lot of people just poo pooed it. Like, of course, that's not even like like their argument is like, well, that's not acting. It's like, okay, then well, what is it? What are we like? What are we doing here? Is he just not like what? Um, or even considering like why not have a best vocal? And then to your point, then the question is, it's like, well, why not have say like a best vocal performance Oscar or an award? And I think what a lot of people might contend is like, well, a lot of these films that have vocal performances are mostly like animated films, or most of them aren't even in and of itself like the Super Mario Brothers movie or stuff like that. Most of these films really aren't of high caliber to be in consideration for Oscars. But then it's almost like a secular argument where it's like, well, maybe the reason you aren't seeing more films, more animated films that have really quality voice work is because voice work isn't celebrated or appreciated as much and enough as it should be. Maybe if we did see, you know, an actor get a nomination for like a vocal performance at an Oscar, then all of a sudden you would see more movies trying to push that. Like, hey, let's really get like really impressive. And how can we sort of have the vocal performance mesh with the visuals of the character, the anime character, what have you? I would love to see more mature or sort of like quote unquote prestigious animated films going forward in the future. But
I think it's been moving in that direction again because of stuff like anime, because of stuff like Studio Ghibli or whatever. There is more of an emphasis on like, getting a high quality vocal performance. I mean, I'm one who said before that Oscars are completely irrelevant to, recognizing what quality actually is or isn't. It's like, um, just because the Oscars say something didn't win an award or whatever, it doesn't actually mean whether it was good or bad, or if it did win an award. It's kind of irrelevant. But I do acknowledge your point that like just giving awards for some of these things kind of pushes the industry in certain directions where
exactly.
again people take it more seriously. They put more effort into these things, whether or not it's justified, because again I don't think the Oscar is actually a representation of quality that much, but um it is for a lot of people very prestigious, and it affects the industry because they all chase these kind of trends.
Yeah. Well, that was funny. It was did you end up seeing it? I think it was last year. So obviously Cillian Murphy won the Oscar Best Actor, but it was Bradley Cooper for Maestro. It was a very big, his Oscar bait role, and he did a lot of campaigning for it, and he sort of got a lot of backlash because it seemed like people were like, "Oh, we don't want to give him the Oscar because he's really you can tell he really wants the Oscar. He's really like trying for it." But then on the other hand, some people retorted like, "Well, that's kind of, to your point, that's kind of what the the system is set up to do. It's like actors are trying to give good performances to get recognition from their peers, and whether you like it or not, the Oscars are the most prestigious awards body in American cinema. So it's kind of it's like, as they put it, it's like complaining that like a basketball team's trying to win the championship. It's like, yeah, in a way, like I even kind of played into it myself, but even that I'm kind of like, yeah, I kind of agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should matter, right? At the end of the day, it should be like indicative of the quality of the film, no matter whether they're trying to or not. And I've heard Oscar bait referred to more as like in terms of like the writing or whatever, where it's like they're picking a topic that's super like they know it'll appeal at the Oscars, right? It's like it's a tragedy about this thing, or it's social commentary or whatever, and it's very sad and dramatic and stuff like that. And I've heard Oscar bait referred to like that before. And again, ultimately, it doesn't matter, right? If it's a good film, it should be a good film, regardless of whether they're. I mean, if they're writing it with the intention of like we're just pandering to the Oscar judges, then that will probably hurt the film's quality, because any kind of pandering like that, like audiences can tell, like this isn't written for to be a good story. It's written to appeal to certain people, but um at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter. The film should just stand on its own. But rarely does it ever actually happen, right? There's a lot of politics that go into the Oscars. There's a lot of politics for anything like this, and I don't think you can ever kind of get away from that. There's always going to be some form of like trying to game the system a little bit to give us the best shot. Because again, like Oscars affect, like, or at least they used to like really affect like financial performances of films. Like it would affect the DVD sales a lot. It would affect a
Yes.
lot of this other stuff, and that's becoming less and less relevant over the years as people have access to streaming, to online, and that's why I think the Oscars have become less and less relevant as they've gone on.
Which is interesting because, well, that was a big thing I brought up a few times, what Matt Damon mentioned on a interview of Hot Ones, and it kind of goes back to the whole people don't go to the theater because they can see it streaming. Um, the idea of DVD sales were such a huge chunk because you could get revenue from a film for months, if not years, after the film's theatrical run. The film was in theaters for 6 months, but then you could get, and sometimes I think it was Shawshank Redemption. That was a film that it didn't do well at the box office, but it ended up gaining like twice its budget just in DVDs or rentals over the course of several years after. Um, but because that's kind of gone now, like there are like rentals on like Amazon stuff, yada yada, but it's not really all that substantial because people just wait. Oh, I have to pay $3. I'll wait because it'll eventually come out on one of the free streaming services. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I almost wonder if the studios are kind of shooting themselves in the foot with it.
The streaming has like changed like the financials of a lot of this stuff too, because I always wonder how they're calculating how much a film makes on streaming. Like, yeah, you can calculate the numbers of how many people watched it or whatever, but if it's part of like a package like Netflix, how much of that is like actual like quantifiable revenue? Like if I watch a film on Netflix, sure, you can take like, oh, I'm gonna watch like let's say I watch like 100 films in a month and I pay $15 a month. Well, you can divide each my $15 by each of those films and say each one of my views is worth whatever. But I think in reality, most people just have their subscription and they're not really going to cancel it. Like, sure, you might cancel it if nothing new comes out for a long time. But for a lot of it, it's like if if I didn't watch this film on Netflix or whatever, I would just watch something else. I would still be paying my $15 a month, right? It's like I wonder how much you can actually quantify, like how much is this movie making on Netflix, how much is this movie making on whatever streaming platform, versus if it wasn't out on there, I would just watch reruns of Friends or whatever. It's like it's not the exact same thing. It's like buying a DVD and having that quantifiable sale.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like I don't even know if. Well, one thing that's been going on the last few years with I think I put a post out there about um when people are talking about, oh, in particular, it was I was people were talking about like, oh, writers, they shouldn't be given, more money because they're bad at their jobs, and I kind of listed a bunch of reasons. Like a lot of people who claim that really aren't keen on like what's actually going. Like when the writer's strike happened, a lot of people kind of turn on the writers. Like, you guys are greedy and selfish, and you just want more money for writing bad movies and TV shows. But what they didn't understand is that there were so many other factors in the writing process, like the writers' rooms, subsidies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how people move up in rank. There were a lot of other issues going on that those people weren't aware of. And one of the issues was the fact that streaming is very dodgy about how. So for example, one thing they brought up was that if you're a writer on, say, like Stranger Things for Netflix, one of the biggest shows on the platform, one of the most revered shows of the platform, you would make the same amount of money as someone who wrote like some like crappy, you know, one season show for Netflix that got released and no one saw. So that kind of is strange. And then the other thing was the fact that because Netflix is so dodgy about the numbers and view numbers, it's difficult for writers to kind of um they kind of have to go off of popularity of shows. Like, oh, I wrote for Stranger Things. Oh, that's fancy. But then you can have another writer who wrote for a show that wasn't as popular and maybe it was seen by just as, if not more people, but they're not able to leverage that in their writing because Netflix is like they're not transparent with that. Like everyone, they always say like it's the most watched film on Netflix in the last like 6 months. It's like, how do we know this is true? Are you just saying this? We don't know.
Yeah, it's all. I mean, it's also like they didn't have the same rules for like residuals like that TV does. Like people are still getting paid off like Seinfeld episodes that were on 20 years ago. They're still getting checks from that, but streaming doesn't work the same way because it's like, I mean, theoretically it should, right? It's still a network or whatever, but there's just different rules, and there's a lot of, again, there's negotiation stuff that has to happen with that. Like these rules for like the studios and TV networks, they didn't pop out of existence from nowhere. It popped out after, you know, unions and negotiations and lawsuits and contracts and all this other stuff for, 50 plus years that led to the current, where TV is. And whether that stuff is good or bad for the viewers, does it result in better quality television? I don't know. We can't say that for sure. But at the end of the day, I hope people get paid, even if they make shit TV shows or whatever. Like, who the fuck cares? Like, I still would want them to get a paycheck and support themselves. It's like it whether they make a crappy show or not doesn't really hurt my life. Like, would I like the writing on some of these things to be better? Sure, but at the end of the day, I don't want the individual person to suffer. I would rather the studio or the network suffer because of that.
Well, that was sort of, going back to the whole, culture, we talked about last time about like team sports culture war thing. I know that there was a big stink about like, Chris Stuckman when he came out with his Madam Web review, and he didn't really want to review it, and he kind of um put the onus on the studios for, it's like, well, the movie was bad, yeah, but like, you have to understand making a film in the studio system can be a pain in the ass, like producers, yada yada yada. And it was funny because, I mean, obviously there are a lot of people who just like really dislike him for whatever reason, but it was sort of strange because there were a lot of people who were either one direction or the other, where it seemed like a lot of the same people who were like really going against the studio system and really had always lambasted them about like creative control and not letting creators create. Um, those people kind of like turned around and now we're saying it's like, no, you can't blame the studio system. You can't just put it all on the studios. And to some extent, I think the issue is that like unless we have like a full account of what happened on a production of a certain film, we can't really tell like was this film bad because there were like 50 producers like looking over the shoulder of the director and were like being really stodgy with the budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Were they like doing a bunch of recuts and reshoots, or was it just a bad film because everyone involved, like the director, and it just didn't turn out, which happens.
Or both. I mean, both those things could be possible, right?
Yeah, but then the question is like if we take a look at the current state of cinema, like people, I really think a lot of people are like very doomer about it, like more like obviously like I'm pretty we're pretty critical ourselves, but I think some people are like super doomer about it, either one way or the other. um but it seems like it's hard to tell, like is it really is it the studios themselves, is it the studio models, or are they just, because yeah, it seemed like, and this is sort of like goes back to the writers strike, it seemed like a lot of people were turning on the writers, like they were, instead of like listening to what the writers were saying or like what their concerns were, they were just saying like you guys aren't doing a good job and you shouldn't. It was just strange. I didn't know if it was like supposed to be a like a culture-esque war thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not pretty doomer about the state of the industry for most things. I will admit I'm not so much of an expert in the world of film. In fact, someone on my stream pointed it out to me today. They're like, "Well, your name is Kino, but you actually don't really pay attention to what's going on in the world of cinema too much." And I'm like, "Actually, yeah, that's a fair point. I'm much more engrossed into the world of television. That's my realm." And and in the world of TV, it's like I'm not I don't think like we're in like a bad spot. Like, are there a lot of shit shows that come out? Yeah, but there's also a good chunk of good shows that come out. Enough to keep me where I always have something I'm kind of looking forward to. Like I'm looking forward to House of Dragon coming out this summer. Like I'm excited about that. The Fallout show came out recently. I've been watching that. It's okay. It's pretty good. So there's always I don't people are like, oh, television sucks now, and I'm like, I don't know. There's always something, and I feel people also overestimate how much like good shows were out at the same time. There are a lot of great shows in the past, but they came out kind of separately. Where it was like this show came out, and then once it was done, this other great show came out, and um, sure there were some great shows. There were shows that were running simultaneously, but um, I don't know. I'm not super doomer about it. I think there's always something coming out where I'm like, okay, I'm interested in this. I'll check it out, and there's plenty of stuff to rewatch too.
Yeah, well, what kind of bugs me about that argument, and I almost wonder, I think we've talked about this before, but like what really bugs me about that argument is like people will say stuff like, yeah, man, over the last like 2 or 3 years, we haven't gotten like that many good shows. Like we'll get a few, but like imagine like back when they had The Sopranos and Breaking Bad and True Detective,
Those
and
were
I'm
never on
like,
the same time.
well, these are this is a 15-year period you're
Yeah,
talking
that's
about.
exactly it.
1999, 2008, and like I think you brought up, there was a time when in like I think it was like 2011 or 2012 when if you look at like the Emmys, there were a lot of good shows out, very strong shows. But I think people kind of don't, or same thing when we're talking about like film. It's like, oh, back in the 70s when we had all these good films, and they'll name like a dozen films which are all excellent, but like you have to understand that like those 12 or 15 or 20 films are a drop in the bucket in regard to the amount of films that came out in
Yeah,
that given period. So yeah, particularly with TV and movies, I think people are they're very like unforgiving of it. They're
yeah,
very like critical of it, of like if every movie isn't like a banger or like
yeah,
a stone cold classic immediately, the film is dead. And it's like, I don't think seems really, I don't really think it's like a political or like no one has an agenda. It's just I think people are just being sort of like they're jumping the gun, and then like 5 years down the line later, they look back and then they amend their opinion on after giving it some distance, after giving it some scope.
yeah. And again, I mean, there were shows that came. There were years where there were multiple good shows at the same time, right? Sopranos and The Wire ran concurrently for a while. Um, at the same time as 24, Mad Men and Breaking Bad ran at the same time. You know, there were years where there's multiple like really good shows coming out. I don't think we're past that stuff. I think there are stuff that's still going on that's like, oh, I'm still interested in that. Succession just ended, a year or two ago. And I thought that was a really great show that, I ran for 4 seasons, and there was other stuff happening during that run too. So is there a lot happening simultaneously right now? Maybe not, but I'm not, I don't think that means that like nothing good is ever going to come out again. I think if there's a year where literally nothing new excites me at all, I'll be worried then. But for now, there's usually at least 2 or 3 shows in a year that I'm like, okay, I'll check this out. There's something interesting going on. It might not be the best overall, but I'm not worried that much about the industry.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we're talking about even like recent television. Even I think 2 or 3 years ago, we had Barry. I mean, which I love, and it got really it's kind of more of like a culty show, but it got really good reviews and had a really dedicated fan base. Better Call Saul, The Bear, and Succession. All four of those shows were on at the same. Barry and Succession ended on the same night, and I think only like a few months before that was Better Call Saul's finale. So for those few years leading up to it, that was like a really good um run. But then again, people think back and it's like, oh, but True Detective, Mr. Robot, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, The Wire, Twin Peaks, Sopranos, The Shield, and it's like this is like a 20-year period you're talking about, bro. Like this is like a huge gap here.
There tends to be, just like strong like years where there's like again multiple shows running at the same time, but shows run for different lengths. Like The Sopranos and The Wire were airing at the same time, but they didn't end at the exact same time, right? They
Mm-mm,
they kind
mm.
of their timelines kind of crisscrossed. So I think we get these occasionally really special years where it's like, oh man, Better Call Saul, Succession, all these other shows are really good, but just because that ended doesn't mean that like, oh, they're not going to make anything this good anymore. It's like, oh no, it's just like those timelines happen to crisscross at the perfect length where we got them in a close range like this. That kind of timing will happen again, but there'll also be years where it's like, oh, okay, maybe only 1 or 2 great shows are airing at the exact same time this year. Like I said, I'm really excited for House of Dragon season 2. I really like the first season. I like it much more than our first discussion. Upon rewatch, I appreciated it more than the first time I watched it. So I'm really looking forward to when that comes out. I think it's going to be really good. And then we'll have to see what's coming out after that.
Yeah, I kind of used because I kind of wrote off House of the Dragon, and well, it's hard because like people say it's like, well, is it as good as Game of Thrones or is it better? And it's like, well, I don't
You
know.
won't know
It
that till it's done. Like it could
that
have a shitty finale.
That too, but also to the point. I mean, like in terms of like even the first season, like even the first season of Game of Thrones. That's another issue. I think that's a good point. People will always compare like when a new show comes out, they'll compare season one with like the peak of another show.
Yeah,
Like this show's okay, but like Breaking Bad season four, it's like,
yeah.
well, hang on, Breaking Bad season one was kind of
Had
like it was good, but it
is
wasn't.
weak.
A lot of
Yeah,
these shows where didn't really reach their peak,
yeah.
and like if I actually like go through it, I usually season 4, 5, 6. That's really when they
That's when
reach their
shows
peak.
hit their stride. Yeah,
Yes. So yeah, again, it goes back to the almost like there's almost like a level of uncharitability
yeah,
where people are like, if this show doesn't like isn't like the greatest thing I've ever fucking seen in the first 3 episodes, it's over. And
yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's just chill. Let's just calm down a little
And I
bit.
think that mentality is really bad because it leads to like the Netflix show syndrome where they throw everything at you in like the
Yes.
first episode and they have nowhere to
Yes.
go from there. But it's because in the age of streaming, people have so many options to go watch stuff. If it doesn't immediately hook them, they won't watch. Versus back in the day when you only had a few things to watch that's on television, you would give it a chance, and it would give a chance for like really slow burn shows. And I think shows like The Wire couldn't exist in a streaming centric network anymore, because if it didn't immediately hook people, they would just, oh, I'm just going to go watch something else. And that's a shame, because there's a lot of great shows that and I'm not saying shows should take too long to build up. Like, you should get into the action enough to engage people, but I think people should give slower shows a chance. I'm gonna go use the bathroom real quick, and we'll continue. Give me 1 minute.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I'm back now. I know we're at the end of our podcast, and I was like, I should try to hold it, but I was like, we sometimes we go for another like 10 minutes or so, and I'm like, I can't wait that long.
No worries. Well, it's funny because we can wrap up, but it's funny because when you mentioned the idea of like, people like not being patient with shows allowing to run their course or to build up, it kind of is very similar with the idea of box office nowadays. And I think this is another issue that's compounding, where if a film doesn't have like, people even mentioned that Mad Max Fury Road, which ended up doing pretty damn well in the long run, um, it didn't do super well. It did okay in its opening weekend, but it didn't do like incredible. It wasn't like a huge hit. But it seemed like the more and more as we go on, if a film doesn't like make all of its money back in like the opening weekend, it's like a failure. And it's like a weird attitude where, because when you think about it, like how theatrical runs used to be, it was like people would go to the movie, they would go home and tell their friends like, hey, this movie fucking rocks. Okay, I'll go see it next week. And that's kind of how it went. But now it seems like that is, it's almost being discouraged in every single avenue, and the only films left are the films that are going, that, like, to your point, they have to hit them with everything. Like, hey, all your favorite actors are in it. It's a recognizable IP. It's a sequel of a thing you already love. Um, and it's kind of almost sad, because then the side effect is like, it doesn't really matter if the film is good. All we have to do is get people in the seats opening weekend, and then if they're there and we get the seats and we make the money, who cares if it's good? Then bye, good. We've gotten what we wanted from you.
I think it ironically leads to this other problem too, where um, uh, I think I do genuinely believe that some studios are like intentionally playing up some films' controversy to like get people in the seats those weekends, either hate watching or not hate watching or whatever. But it I think that there's such an emphasis now on opening weekend, and I understand why they do that to an extent too, because the returns do fall off week over week, right? Each week a film has been out, less and less people are going to go watch it. I think that's normal kind of behavior. So there is an emphasis on like, it has to really hit that first fucking weekend, because the next weekend's going to have like half the views and the half the views of that. And again, over time you can still have a good performance, but also theaters want to churn out films quicker too, because they want to make room for new films, or re-releases or whatever they're trying to do. So they don't want them to be in theaters like forever, taking up space, unless people are going to continue to go see them. So yeah, I mean, it's the economic model of film and television can suck at times. Like, it does feel like it hurts films in general at times. Um, but again, at the end of the day, I mean, someone's got to pay for these things, and they do cost a lot of money to make. So I don't know, until I mean, everyone would like probably be happier if stuff came directly on streaming, because it's more convenient. But I do wonder about the long term, like how viable that is, like long term for the industry. Like, I think streaming centric stuff makes less money in general. So how are they going to, balance that out with, you know, being able to create all these films and television shows?
I mean, I'm sure someone could explain it to me, but I still don't really understand how streaming makes money. Because subscriptions, they're eventually going to, um, you know, level off at some point, where people are watching, people are loving it, but no one's subscribing. No, there's no new subscribers. So the only choice you have is to raise prices, but that's only going to help a little bit.
It's a
Um,
hard economic model. It's like, I don't know how they we're gonna get into realms of like more monetization and stuff like that. I mean, Netflix had that thing with their ads and everything like that. So and it's gonna suck as a consumer. Like obviously as a consumer, we want everything for free and as convenient as possible, but someone has to pay for this stuff. And I don't want to be a shill or anything like that. Like I as a consumer, it's like, oh yeah, this sucks, that they're raising their prices or whatever. But I do wonder how they fund all these things. And not to say that again, some people are going to be like, well, fuck funding all this stuff because I don't like 90% of the stuff they're making. That's a valid argument too. But
But then you don't get the diamond in the rough. That's the
yeah, it's a
issue.
it's a difficult process.
Yeah. Well, let's hope for the best. We'll see.
Well, we'll wrap there. We had a couple of stuff we were gonna announce at the beginning. Did you want to tell people your uh what you just finished working on?
Oh yeah, my Hannibal video is finally done. It's a long one. It's about an hour longer than I expected. But it's YouTube's being a pain right now. I'm trying to figure out but it's on its way. Hannibal, the video, it will be up. It's hopefully in this week coming.
I can't wait to see that. I was telling you a little bit earlier how I'm uh, uploading compilations of my Soprano log series, mostly because HBO has been fucking with me for copyright stuff on my videos. So I was like, well, fuck you. Then I'm gonna re-release my videos again, and hopefully get people to watch it there, so I can get more ad revenue. Hopefully, people can watch that. We have our event that's happening in New York on August 17th. So if you want to see me and Mac live in person, we made announcements on our channels about that, but I'll throw a link in the pinned comment of this episode. So if you are going to be in New York City on August 17th and want to come see us live, along with some other Sopranos content creators, Sopranos Blueprint, as well as a virtual appearance by the boss of Sopranos YouTube content, Borko. He's going to be there virtually on Zoom. Um, Sign up for that. Tickets are free. We're about a third of the way through our tickets so far. So if you have an interest in being there, make sure you sign up ASAP. But it's gonna be really fun. I can't wait to do that.
It will be fun. Make sure to join us.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to this, and stay tuned for another episode of No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.